So let's start with my 8 revenue stream. I would actually be at $335,000. I spent $63,000 this year on various different contractors. So the large majority, that is a juicy percentage. Now that I see the dollar amount that it cost me, like a 40% drop in income, what was I doing? What was I doing? I look back and I'm like, wow, that is a lesson learned the hard way. Hello and welcome back to the Dishing Up Digital podcast, your favorite podcast for all things social media management and online business. Today, I am pulling back the curtain and revealing my 2024 income report. We're going to break down my 8 different revenue streams. Then we're going to take a look at the income versus my expenses and how much it actually costs to run my business. And then because I am fully transparent in these income reports, I'm taking it a step further this year and I'm doing a quarter by quarter breakdown of the entire year, analyzing the profit, the expenses, and the key lessons from each quarter because there were some, shall we say, fluctuations in my income. And I know whenever someone's making like longer podcast episodes or YouTube videos, they're like, make sure you stay till the end because that's the best part. I'm not saying that to be like clickbaity and boost my retention. I genuinely mean that quarter 4 of 2024 is probably going to shock a lot of you. And honestly, when I analyzed my income from that period of October through to December, I almost didn't film this video because a lot happened. There's a lot to dive into. And it was a bit of a flop. Your girl was in her flop era. But I've been doing these kind of income reports since I started my business. And a lot of people think it's cringy to talk about money online. But I know that when I was working in my 9-to-5 job, trying to figure out a way out, trying to figure out what my business could be, these kind of podcasts, YouTube videos, they were all I would listen to because I know there's people out there who need that inspiration, who need that motivation, who just need to see like what is possible when you go out on your own, when you start your own business, because it's a terrifying journey. And I know how alone you can feel on that path. And that's exactly why I create content like this on the internet and why we have this podcast. So before we dive into the juicy numbers, make sure you are subscribed. So let's start with my 8 revenue streams. The first one, the most obvious one, as a social media manager, I'm still working with clients. So my client work, which varies from social media strategy sessions to month social media contracts or retainer packages. That part of my business made up 25% of my revenue for this year. This has been a trend, I would say, since I started my business. That percentage goes down, but it doesn't necessarily go down income-wise. It goes down percentage-wise. When it comes to your one-on-one client work as a service provider, you will reach a cap in that you only have so much time in your day. You can only take on so many clients. And that is where my next revenue stream comes in, and that's courses and digital products. So although I've made the same amount of money as 2023 from my client work, the percentage has dropped because my course sales has increased. Courses and digital products make up 70% of this year's revenue. So you can see that is the large majority. That is a juicy percentage. And the reason for that is when you're selling digital products, one of the perks, one of the beautiful things about selling digital products is it is uncapped. You can sell your course to as many people as possible and it doesn't take up more of your time. Same thing with people who have membership models. I personally don't have a membership. I have my course, the Dishing Up Digital School, which trains people to become social media managers like me. And then I also have template bundles and a few other masterclasses. So the Dishing Up Digital School actually made up 70% of that 70%. And the other 30% was made up of private coaching. All of my private coaching like runs through my Kajabi website as well. So it kind of gets like blended in. But I believe from my rough calculations, 8% of that was private coaching. 22% was other digital products. So I had a few one-off masterclasses that I sold, my social media management template bundle. Obviously, the chunk of my revenue is coming from the Dishing Up Digital School, which is very cool because that was what I was trying to grow this year. Now, let's pop in a quick disclaimer here. I'm not the best at math, and another reason why I like to do these income reports is to show you that even if you are not, the smartest girl when it comes to the numbers, and you maybe are not that great at maths like me, or accounting, you can still keep track of your numbers as a business owner. However, when I went back to like double check some of these percentages, some of them were like slightly off there. So it's like a rough calculation. And one of the things I noticed, like 70% of my revenue came from course sales, but then I hadn't accounted for transaction fees. So whenever I make a course sale, there's a transaction fee from my payment gateway, which whether it's Stripe or PayPal, whichever one that customer has chosen to use. So it drops down to, I believe, around like 68% once I account for all of those transaction fees. So that leaves roughly like 5 to 8% left of my revenue. And the next biggest chunk of that is sponsorships. And this was a bit of a win for 2024 because I believe I had no sponsorships, I want to say, in 2024, or maybe if any one, and it would have been quite small. And this was an intentional choice for me, a revenue stream that I really wanted to grow this year was sponsorships. So I'm really happy with that percentage, even though it might be small, especially compared to other perhaps creators and online entrepreneurs. But for me, like that extra 7-8%, like I'm like, damn, yeah, that really boosted me some months. And if you are new here, you may not know that multiple revenue streams is my favorite word, my favorite phrase in business. And I really saw an opportunity for me to create that new revenue stream to help me with scaling and with helping me reach my new goals. In a similar line, my next revenue stream is affiliate revenue. Now, I don't have an exact percentage of this because it was really small. The next 3 revenue streams are really small, so I've just put the dollar amount in there rather than the percentage. And for affiliate revenue, I don't have the exact price, but I'm estimating around $1,000. I'm an affiliate for Xtiles, which is my favorite Notion alternative. It's an organizational app. I'm also an affiliate for Cloud Campaign, which is an amazing scheduler for social media managers. And then through my blog, I am actually in the Like to Know. Is it Like to Know network? It used to be called Reward Style, and that's where I have past revenue that comes in from like old YouTube videos and old blog posts. And I have been trying to utilize it more with like my clothing hauls that I have done on my YouTube channel this year. I've been trying to, add those links in. So we had, I think, 2 reward style payouts, which would have been a couple of $100s each. And then the final thing was an affiliate for Ultra Human, which is the smart ring that I use. But this was another revenue stream that I set the goal of growing in 2024. And I don't think I quite nailed it. There's still room for improvement. But again, an extra $1,000 is pretty sweet. Like if I can make enough revenue off software subscriptions, for example, from my affiliate links to then pay for my software subscriptions, for me, that's worth the effort. And that's the thing with affiliate revenue, like it is low effort revenue. So I'm interested to see if I can grow that next year. Another small one that gets a nice little shout out is my YouTube channel. This brought in $3,200 in AdSense. We did not upload a lot of YouTube videos this year. I say we because I run the channel with my sister and I. I honestly always look at YouTube ad revenue as just a bonus. Tara and I cashed out some of the ad revenue earlier this year to use when we went on a trip together to the US. We went to Lake Tahoe and we went skiing. So that was really nice. Again, you just like a little bonus every now and then, but it's definitely not an integral part of my business and of my revenue structure. But the next 2 revenue streams get even smaller. My book, Bitch Power, it's a book that I wrote about female entrepreneurship and empowering more women into starting their own businesses. I freaking love that book and I'm so proud of it. And I released it in 2023. Yeah, it was the beginning of last year. And this year I only made $200 in book sales. By the time I have my Amazon cut taken out of the sales and again, like transaction fees, it really just worked out to be like $200 US. And sometimes you don't even get paid out all of that money because the way it works with Amazon when you're self-publishing is if someone buys in like euros or another like currency, Canadian dollars, you have to reach a certain threshold before they're going to pay you out in that currency. So most of my payouts have just come from Australian sales and US sales. I don't even believe I've had one from my British UK sales. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about writing books and the profitability of it, but when I think back to why I wrote my book, it was more of like a personal goal and a personal passion project. And I do believe it's brought people into my business. I've had people purchase the book and then sign up for the Dishing Up Digital School or purchase the book and sign up for private coaching. So it has benefited my business. But in case anyone's curious, I do not make a lot of money off that book. The next revenue stream really shows off my dorky side that I track this, but I think it's really fun because it's essentially free money, but that is interest. So the way that I set up my business bank accounts is I have one that's like a long-term savings account. This is where I put away money for tax and other things that I'm obligated to pay as someone who runs their own business, and also just to have a little bit of, cash savings in the bank. It's always good to have a little bit of extra. Because I've structured this so it's a high interest savings account, I ended up making $533 from interest this year, which is kind of awesome. It's literally just money that's been sitting in my bank account earning interest for me. So if you are a business owner and you haven't set up your accounts to either be in some sort of fund or fixed deposit, or even just like me, a really simple high interest banking account, I would highly recommend it. This, of course, doesn't include interest and dividends from my own personal shares and investment portfolio, but it's nice that my business alone got an extra $530 this year. My final revenue stream, I'm kind of cheating here for the 8th final revenue stream because it made me $0, but I wanted to put it in here for a little bit of personal accountability because the category is speaking. And I have done a lot of speaking engagements this year, and I have done them all for free. And I'm giving myself a little bit of a kick up the butt in 2025 and put myself out there for more paid speaking opportunities. I mentioned this in a podcast episode a few weeks ago, but I am getting really conscious of what I say yes to in business now and the time commitment and the time investment. And while doing public speaking, doing guest masterclasses for other business owners, it's a great opportunity to connect with new people and reach new audiences. It's a huge chunk of my time. And I think I've been probably too nice in just giving away that time for free, especially when I see, like, often I'll do a guest masterclass for someone and then they use that to market their program. And it kind of like leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth because I'm like, you're essentially monetizing my knowledge and my experience. And I've just done that for free for exposure, but you're making money off it. Like the situations like that, I'm like, Ellen, you really should have charged someone for that. And it's something where I bring in guest speakers often for some of my programs. And I always really like to make the effort to pay them if that's in the budget. And if it's not in the budget, I often choose not to hire a guest speaker. So it's something that I just really want to double down on. So we're putting it in here for accountability. Now let's jump into the juicy stuff, what you've been waiting for. What was my total revenue for 2024 and how much of that was actually profit? Now, a little bit of a note here, all of my reporting is done in New Zealand dollars because that is where I live and this is where I pay tax. However, the majority of my customers do tend to live in the United States. This is why I generally charge in all of my programs in USD. So this year I made over 270,000 New Zealand dollars. This currently converts to 150, 160,000 US dollars. However, I will say that the New Zealand dollar has just recently tanked in the last 2 weeks, which I am not too pleased about because I'm going on holiday to the US in a couple of weeks, but the conversion rate is a little bit lower. But I thought I would share that just for a little bit of context, perhaps for my international listeners. One thing I haven't mentioned so far is my content studio. This is a second business that I have. And the reason why I haven't included this in any of my revenue streams is because it is registered as an entirely separate company. And I also run this with my partner, so I don't own 100% of the shares. And at this stage, the business is in its infancy. It's doing super well and we are turning a profit, but all of the profits of the studio are getting reinvested and we are actually opening a second location shortly. So throughout this year, I haven't taken a single dollar out of that for my personal income. And I thought if I started breaking down the expenses and profit and blah, blah, blah of that company, it's an entirely different business model and the expenses and everything like that is so different, I thought it would get a little bit confusing, a little bit overwhelming. So if I were to add those two together, Dishing Up Digital, 270,000, Mackenzie Studios, 65,000, I would actually be at $335,000. However, as I said, for the purpose of this episode, we're just going to be focusing on Dishing Up Digital. Now let's talk about expenses because it annoys me when people on the internet talk about their income and they don't talk about profit because your gross revenue and your profit are quite different. Now, this year, my expenses did increase quite significantly and I spent over $200,000, which blows my mind. Last year it was 130 and I know that blew my mind and now we've soared past 200,000. Now, I don't have the exact figure for this because I did actually bring on a new accountant for the end of financial year and in New Zealand, the end of the financial year is in March. So it's a little bit confusing and kind of messes up some of your accounting when you look at the calendar year overview because it's not the financial year. So there were some changes there. I'm now on a set salary for my business. So I'm actually an employee of Dishing Up Digital. And with that, I also pay KiwiSaver as I'm the employee, which is our retirement scheme here in New Zealand. So some of that definitely accounts for the increase in expenses. It's just the way that I'm reporting on my business and how I'm like filing all of those things. I wanted to break down my operating expenses and just go through a few of the biggest categories and what these kind of look like for me as a social media manager, freelancer / solopreneur, online business owner, and all of the things that I do. So in 2024, I spent over $7,000 on software subscriptions, which really did surprise me because a lot of these subscriptions are small, but they definitely stack up. So in here, I have things like Calendly, which is my calendar booking software. I have PandaDoc, which is my contract software. Xtiles. I did actually, pay for an Xtiles subscription, even though that I'm a paid partner and I have done sponsorships with them because I just genuinely like the software. What else? We have my Canva subscription, my Adobe subscription. I have a software for hosting webinars. I have my Zooms for Zoom calls. I definitely started reducing some of those software subscriptions in the later part of 2024. And we will get into that in a second. As I said, stay tuned for Q4 report. It's an interesting one. Another big operating expense category is courses and coaching. I spent $21,000 on this. And to be honest, I thought it would be more. But when I looked back, I had one mastermind that I joined and then one business retreat that I went to. And those were the main expenses, plus some one-off sessions with other coaches. As I mentioned, I also got a new accountant and I love her. Shout out to Liv from Olive Accounting. If you need an accountant here in New Zealand, she is absolutely wonderful. Highly recommend. And I spent $4,700 on all things accounting. So that includes my accounting software subscription, but also payments for filing my end of year reports and all of that kind of stuff. I believe it was from April this year. I also hired Liv to do my bookkeeping. So she's now on like a monthly kind of like retainer for me. And she does a lot of my reconciling and organizing all of my accounts and things. And that was a pretty big step for me because honestly, if you looked at my accounting like category in previous years, it would have just been like $200 from my accounting software. And it was a big step, but something that I think I needed to do. And now that I've outsourced that part of my business, I'm like, yeah, that was the right decision. It was time. I think doing your accounting as a new freelancer is totally doable and it's a great way to save money. But you do get to the point where your business is growing, there's more expenses, there's more money coming in and money going out, and it just makes sense to have a professional helping you. The next category of operating expenses is by far the biggest, and it's always the biggest every year, and that is my contractors. I spent $63,000 this year on various different contractors. I had some who were on a monthly retainer working with me, helping me support with client work. I have a podcast editor, so there's a few different roles that were kind of more permanent in my business. I also have a copyright agency who helps me with a bunch of like legal copywriting stuff because someone decided to steal my course and upload it on the dark web, which is a huge violation and completely disgusting. And we won't go into that right now because I don't like to draw any attention to gross people like that on the internet. I also had an ads agency, which I, funnily enough, went back and listened to my 2023 income report. And I talked about how that was such an amazing investment. And I actually decided to end that contract. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my quarterly report and what changed my mind there. But they were, for up until October, they were another monthly kind of contractor that I always worked with. Then I had a few one-offs. I worked with a copywriter on a short-term project. I worked with an email support company that helped me when like Google changed all of their like rules around sending mass emails. And then I also had a support coach, which was so funny when I was looking back on my expenses. I was like, wow, that feels like a lifetime ago. I ended up firing that support coach because it was just, they basically weren't doing any work and I'd been paying them for 3 months without realizing that they weren't delivering on what I'd hired them to do. And it was just a really not nice situation to go through. Another one of those learning opportunities in business. You just got to take it on the chin. Another chunky category for operating expenses is advertising. And this includes the money that was spent on Facebook ads. So obviously contractors is the ads agency. Advertising was the dollars that went to Meta. It also includes my website subscriptions. I tag that as an advertising thing because obviously my website is my advertising. So I do pay quite a lot every month for my Kajabi subscription, but it's worth every dollar. And then I also have my agency website set up on Squarespace, who, by the way, are not sponsoring this video. I've never worked with Squarespace, but I have had a blog with them, I want to say since 2014, 2015, maybe 2014. And then obviously I've had my agency website with them since I launched that in 2019. And the final category on my expenses that I wanted to share, obviously there's a few other ones, these are the highlights. But I spent over $11,000 on travel this year. And that was both national, international, and this was because I went to a business retreat in Oregon, Portland. And then I also went on a second trip later in the year to LA where I attended the Kajabi conference. So a few different trips, and I'm really excited about that because that was actually one of my goals for 2023 was to find an international mastermind that I could attend in person. The one that I went to was with Ellen Yen from Cubicle to CEO, which is really awesome because I've followed her for years. And then to have also gone to such like a huge, incredible international conference, like it was such a level up for me and something that I've been wanting to do for years. But I'm really glad that I waited for the right opportunities. I didn't just go to like any old retreat and sign up for it. I really looked for things that benefited my business specifically and what I wanted to grow and focus on. Okay, now we are getting to my third sort of category or section of this video. And this is where I'm going to try not to get too emotional because to give you a spoiler of what's ahead, when I went and broke down my quarterly income reports, I was really upset because I did not achieve my goals in 2024 in terms of revenue. And I actually made $10,000 less than I did in 2023, which I did not realize until this morning when I was writing out my notes for today's video. And that was pretty disappointing for me as someone who has big goals and things that they want to achieve in their business. It's confronting when you're like, oh, wow, I didn't do that. And I had a lot to unpack as to where I went wrong and some comparisons with 2023. And in all honesty, I thought about not recording this episode because it does make me feel like a little bit of a failure. And I hate using that word or talking about myself like that because I know that I've accomplished so many incredible things in 2024 and it's been a great year. And I've also learned some really valuable lessons for my business. And I always say when you're a business owner and you go through a difficult year, the fact that you're still standing and you still turned a profit, like that is an accomplishment in its own. And I keep trying to remind myself of that. And I have a lot of insights to share. So shout out to those who have made it this far in this video and are sticking around because we're going to dive in each quarter, what went right, what went wrong. So in the first quarter of 2024, I made 71,000 New Zealand dollars and my expenses were $59,000. Now, I did a little quarterly income report for the first part of the year on my Instagram. And it was just a little quick reel where I was like, income, expenses for each month of that quarter. And I had, I think, 1 or 2 people message me and be like, wow, I never thought your expenses would be that high. And I think I came into 2024 with some like really big energy. And I was really, one of my lessons from 2023 was how like valuable it was to invest in my business and to not be afraid to spend money. It wasn't until I think I had someone else's perspective looking at my income and they were like, wow, your expenses are quite high, that I looked at it and I was like, actually, those are quite high. Like I'm all for investing in my business. Once again, we love that. You got to spend money to make money. But I had a little bit of awakening where I was like, wow, I actually did spend a lot. And the reason for that was because I booked that business retreat. So there were the ticket costs involved with that. There was the flights and accommodation and insurance and all that kind of stuff. That was when I'd also hired a copywriter that I was working with. And that was quite like a premium price point. I believe it was almost $20,000 that I'd paid from various installments. And disappointingly, especially now that I can look at the full year of 2024, I don't think I really got the ROI from a lot of those investments, whether it was contractors, whether it was retreats that I went to. Like I had a great time and I loved working with all those people. But when I see how much I spent and what happened this year, I'm like, oh, I don't think I put my money in the right places. But sometimes you don't know that until you do it as an entrepreneur. Like you don't know what you don't know. After Q1, this really made me look at my contractors and what was actually valuable things for me to be outsourcing, because I realized I was entering a little bit of a different phase in business and I couldn't continue operating in the same way that I had in the past. So let's skip along to Q2. And in Q2 of 2024, I made $74,000. So a couple of $1,000s more than Q1. And my expenses dropped down to $41,000. So still quite high, but definitely lower than the $59,000 from Q1. This was a really interesting quarter because I had the highest amount of course sales. So I had less client work that I was doing. And it was also the highest quarter for sponsorships. I had an overlap of quite a few different sponsorships. I did a long-term partnership with Riverside on my podcast, and then they actually extended that partnership. So it was a really great month to see all of those revenue streams kind of coming together. Jumping into Q3, this is when things started to go a little bit south. So I still made $74,000, so on par, same level as Q2. My expenses jumped up just by a couple of thousand, so we hit $51,000 in operating expenses. But it was at the beginning of that quarter that I decided to end a contract with a long-term client. And this was a client I'd been working with for 3 years. And we just went through a really tricky period where they hired a new team member who was overseeing me. And I was just getting a lot of criticism and feedback all of a sudden with a client that I've been working with for 3 years who was really happy with their socials, who had seen really great growth. All of a sudden I had this new person who was just constantly getting me to redo graphics. I was suddenly spending so much of my time on their content, just redoing things again and again. And I didn't have a revisions clause in my contract with that client because we'd been working together for 3 years. And 3 years ago, I did not have a limit on the number of revisions for my clients. It's something that I have since added. It was a bit of an eye-opening experience and a little bit of a humbling one because I hadn't really had to deal with a client like that in quite some time. I'm really proud of myself for actually just walking away from the situation. I decided it wasn't going to be the client for me anymore and things had changed too much. And what was really clear to me now that I look at my income report as well is even though I dropped that client and I had a month where I hadn't replaced them yet, I was still looking for a new client, I still made the same amount of money. And that is the benefit, the perk of having multiple revenue streams. You can have something go wrong with one revenue stream and you can just dial up one of the others, right? I let that client go and I could dial up my course sales that month or my sponsorship deals. And I was able to bridge that gap until I found the perfect dream client to replace them. So I ended up replacing them with a client who was paying me more, which is fantastic. I gave myself almost a little pay raise by finding a new and different client. And this is when Q3 starts to contrast with Q4. And I don't want to get ahead of myself. There's still a few more things for Q3 that I wanted to mention. In terms of expenses, that was when I decided to host my own event while I was in LA for my Kajabi conference. So there were expenses in terms of renting the studio and renting the venue for that. And then I rebooked my flights so that I could allow extra time to host that event. I also went on a bit of a frenzy upgrading a lot of my software and switching to annual plans for a lot of that software as well. So that kind of accounted for that little bump there as well. What's also important to note in Q3 is I ran a really big promo for the Dishing Up Digital School to close doors. It was the first time since I opened the program that I decided to close enrollment. And that was because I was planning to redo the entire curriculum, which I did. And boy, is it looking fantastic. However, in my original plan for 2024, when I wrote out what I wanted to do and what I wanted to focus on, it was meant to be a 1 month closure. It was only meant to be closed for a short amount of time to allow me to focus on filming the new video lessons and then put them back up. And it was meant to be a month of intentionally taking an income drop so that I could just redo the program and have all of my time and energy to invest in that. And unfortunately, that was the decision that kind of set me up for failure in Q4. Closing the Dishing Up Digital School had a massive impact on my revenue. And unfortunately, because of other situations and things that happened in Q4, I took almost 3 months to get it back open for enrollment. I think we had closed September, October, and then we opened end of November. So almost 3 months of my primary revenue stream was gone. And let's just rip off the Band-Aid and let's talk about Q4 because again, we're going to try not to cry here, Alan, but Q4, my revenue dropped by 40%. 40% drop in revenue. My income from client work dropped. My income from course sales dropped. Everything went down. And if I had a time machine, the things I would go back and tell past Ellen, because Q4 kind of turned into a perfect storm of things that went wrong or things that happened. One thing that went right, let's start on a high. Let's talk positives. I bought a house with my partner, Ali. In case you haven't seen me talking about this on social media, I'm pretty proud of the milestone. And actually, when I was re-listening to my 2023 kind of recap where I talked about lessons learned, I mentioned about how I was saving for a house. And we didn't actually expect to be able to afford a house in 2024. It was actually a goal for next year. And the fact that we did it this year, I am so freaking proud of us. Like, we really worked our butts off. We've paid for this house, or, we haven't paid for the whole house, but the deposit was all of our own money. There were no, a lot of people will buy with their parents my age, and we really wanted to do this on our own. And I'm just so, so proud. And when that happened, it happened very quickly. We weren't expecting to buy a house. I actually have a whole podcast episode about the journey of buying a house, by the way, especially as a freelancer. So I'll link that down below in case you do want to have a listen to it. But it all happened really quickly, and it happened right when I was meant to be closing the Dishing Up Digital School and working on that. And naturally, I made a bit of the decision to be like, hey, I want to enjoy this moment. I want to enjoy this big milestone in my life of moving into my first house, and I don't want to put too much pressure on myself. So I'm going to give myself a bit of an extension, and we're going to reopen the Dishing Up Digital School in October, because originally it was like beginning of October, like finish it in September, ready to launch in beginning of October. I was like, this is probably going to fall into late October now. But ultimately, when I reflect on Q4, and I honestly wasn't going to talk about this client situation until next year, because I wanted to give it some breathing room until I'd really dealt with it all and closed that chapter and could reflect more with distance away from all of those emotions. But honestly, doing this income report, I was like, wow, like I cannot not talk about this client scenario because of the huge, drastic, obvious impact that it had on my revenue and on my business. So to give you an overview without getting too much into the details, I started working with a client who originally came to me looking for coaching and strategy, and I turned them down because I said I didn't have capacity. But then they'd had a look at my website and they were interested in another service, which I have since taken off my website, so you won't be able to find it. But it was a service that I was offering in partnership with another service provider. So in my mind, it was going to be a 50-50 split of the work, and therefore I would have the capacity to do it. And long story short, this was an extremely difficult and demanding client, the kind of client that I had to be voice messaging almost every single day. Honestly, the whole experience feels like a fever dream now. Like I'm trying to find the words to explain it. This was someone that just really did not respect my time or my opinions. It was, I'd been brought in to offer strategy, but then they didn't want to actually implement any of the strategy that I gave them. Things were constantly being changed at the last minute. I thought I'd decided on a strategy and action plan for their marketing launch, and then it got changed at the last minute. And I had a phone call with this client, which will forever haunt me, it was a Zoom call where they essentially called me a bully and a whole bunch of other nasty things. And what ended up happening was I tried to stick it out. I did my absolute best. I worked with this client on an in-person shoot day. I did a huge amount of extra hours that I was not paid for, just because I was trying to almost prove I am a good person. I am a good social media manager. I am a good strategist. Look at me, I'm doing this project. And I just look back now and I realize it was a situation where no matter what I did, it wasn't going to be good enough. And I spent hours and hours on extra work trying to make things right. And in the end, I ended up walking away from the project. It was a 3-month contract and we got 2 months in. And for my mental health, I just had to walk away. I couldn't do it anymore. I was in tears. It was a horrible experience that I really hope no one else goes through. And I ended up refunding the client, which also contributes to lower income for Q4, because that was about $4,000 out of pocket. But now, looking at my income report, what is so obvious to me is the mental drain of having a bad client and how that can drastically impact other parts of your business. So another thing that didn't happen in Q4 was I had no sponsorships. But part of that was because I didn't have the mental capacity. I didn't have the time to be taking on any sponsorships, to be doing videos. I turned down opportunities because I was working with this client who was soaking up so much of my time and my mental energy. The whole relaunch of the Dishing Up Digital School was delayed because I just didn't have the energy again to put into it. I got extremely upset with myself for saying yes to this client because I felt like I dishonored my goal that I'd set at the beginning of the year, which was to put so much love and time into the relaunch of the Dishing Up Digital School, which I did, but obviously it took 3 times as long because I just couldn't. I'd have days where I'd be like, I'm so drained from that client that I have to take a day off. Like I can't cope. Or I'd have such low confidence that, oh my God, this is where I start to get emotional. I had such low confidence. I was like, I can't show up and teach my students when this person's just like, when I've just had this person like slate me and say all of these awful things to me. And again, I look back now, I'm like, I should have just walked away earlier. But I really wanted to prove that I could do it. And I think that's my advice for anyone else listening who might be going through a similar situation. If it's hurting your mental health, just walk away. It is not worth it. It is not worth the strain that put on myself. And now that I see the dollar amount that it cost me, like I went from making $74,000 in those previous 2 quarters to 49, like a 40% drop in income. What was I doing? And that to me, I didn't realize when I was in it how much time and energy was being soaked up by this literally $2,000 monthly contract that I was splitting 50-50 with someone. I look back and I'm like, wow, that is a lesson learned the hard way. What was also interesting was this all broke down. I think it was the end of November that I finally decided to pull myself from the contract and refund the client. And December, I was like, I need to recover. I needed to fall back in love with my business, with my work, and I couldn't take on any extra client work. Most importantly, my big sister was also getting married, and I knew this was probably like, apart from my own wedding, the most important wedding that I would attend in my life. And I wanted to make sure I was fully present and soaking up and enjoying every moment of it. So I did intentionally scale back on my work there. I filmed a YouTube video at the beginning of the month on this, but I was also in like a really big creative rut, lacking a lot of confidence. And I decided, looking also at my analytics, I really just wanted to double down on all of my organic content. So I had paused the Facebook ads. I had scaled back a few contractors as well. And I wanted to get back to why I started my business, which was being creative, making cool content, whether that's for myself or for my clients. And that was my focus on December. So I knew going into it, it was going to be a low income month/quarter, but I knew I needed that. And I didn't want any sort of pressure of my goals to stop me from having like the rest that I needed. However, it is still confronting when you end the year and you zoom out and you see that impact of what can happen in your business. When I reflect on the numbers from Q4, another interesting thing to note was that I reduced my contractors' costs down from $14,000 to only $5,000. So you can see I was really intentionally trying to like scale back on all things in my business. And for the first time that year, the highest expense category was actually my personal salary and the money that I was paying myself. And I really want to take that as a positive, as a win from this experience, because I think I needed to remind myself of how nice it is to run a business when those profit margins are a little bit larger, and how I really want to prioritize me, because at the end of the day, like I'm the one putting the most effort into my business. And I think I kind of lost my way a little bit where I was spending way more money on contractors and funding other people's salaries than my own. And I really want to take note of that as I go into 2025. Overall, the expenses from Q4 were only $31,000. So although my gross revenue dropped quite drastically, my expenses also dropped down, which means I almost had $20,000 of profit still, which when you compare that to Q1 and my expenses and how much profit I made, it was actually the same amount of profit. So little moments like that where I didn't feel the pinch. You know what people say, like, oh, you're feeling the pinch, you know, you didn't make as much money in November and December and whatever. I didn't feel that financially because I'd reduced my expenses so much. And it was quite a nice reminder for the control that I have in my business at the end of the day, and how maybe I've lost sight of what matters a lot to me in my business, which is that freedom and that independence, and also just like supporting me and my lifestyle and that freedom and flexibility. It was kind of cool to see that I can have a 40% drop in revenue and still pay for everything that I needed to and pay myself. And that didn't put any financial strain on me, and I didn't have to dip into any of the business savings, and we were in fact still profitable. So in conclusion, a couple of lessons from 2024 that I want to carry into 2025. As I mentioned, being really intentional with the contractors that I hired. It's become very obvious to me when I zoom out on a whole. I did hemorrhage a lot of money on other contractors, and I won't go into all of the details on those, but I hired quite a few people that just didn't work out for my business. And my mistake was leaving them on payroll, or not technically payroll, but leaving the contracts because I just didn't know what to do, or I didn't know who to replace them with. And I just let them run on for too long. So for 2025, I want to be really intentional about who I hire and bring into the business. And I also want to make sure that I am getting ROI out of each of those contractors. And if it's not working out, then I'm ending the contract. I just need to be more strict. I was treating my contractors like they were employees and giving them huge notice periods or huge opportunity to grow and lengthy period of time. And it just wasn't working. My next lesson is boundaries are a good thing. This is what essentially blew up that contract with that client that kind of made Q4 so crazy, was simply me trying to implement boundaries, whether that was on pricing, whether that was on how many messages and emails we were having, whether that was the contract deliverables changing constantly. The negativity came as a response to me implementing boundaries. And I think that's what also made it so difficult, because I was trying to do something good for myself. And when you implement a boundary and you have a really negative reaction from a client, it's tough, because then the next time you go to implement a boundary, you're really scared to do it. I have to remind myself that boundaries are good for me and good for my client and good for the end result of the project. And if the client doesn't agree with that, then they're not the right client for me. And I'm carrying that energy most definitely into 2025. The other lesson I wrote down here is I have nothing to prove. I don't want to get too deep on that one. I feel like, I've already gone quite emotional on this podcast episode. But for anybody else who's hustling away on their business, trying to prove their worth, trying to prove that they're good enough, I just want to say that you don't have anything to prove, and what you've accomplished already, no matter how big or small, is amazing, and that you are worthy no matter what. This has been a super long episode, but I really appreciate those of you who've stuck through to the end. If you have any thoughts, or if you've related to this episode at all, I would love to hear from you. Please feel free to jump over to Instagram and send me a DM. Despite some of the challenges this year, I am genuinely really looking forward to what 2025 has installed. And I hope you guys will continue to stick around as I learn and grow and share it all on this podcast.